Hello and good evening to the 14th edition of Dialogues Calcutta International LGBTQIA Film and Video Festival. When asked in one of her interviews what is it that is her favorite part about filmmaking, Mira Nair tells us it is to inhabit a world that is successful in capturing its complexity, beauty, and unpredictability in all its facets. She has spoken extensively about the craft of filmmaking, unabashedly labeling it as a political act, and the nuances she so passionately explores in her films, the tug of diverse and competing worlds, and ways to bridge these gaps between cultures, between races, genders. In the process, Mira Nair shows us how films can challenge stereotypes and assumptions. Today, at the 14th edition of Dialogues, Calcutta International LGBTQIA Film and Video Festival, it is a matter of immense pride for us to have amidst us one of the most important filmmakers of world cinema speak about her 1985 documentary, India Cabaret, and the contours of morality and respectability that is perhaps even more relevant given the nature of the times that we are living in. Mira will be in conversation with Vqueeram, who's a researcher, teacher, a friend, and most importantly, one of the finest thinkers I have the good fortune of knowing, and who famously says, lives and loves in Delhi. Over to Vikram.
Hi, Anindya. Thank you for organizing this and for everyone whose support made this possible. This is really an honor to be able to have this conversation, and I will try not to fangirl on all our behalf when we finally have Mira and I in conversation. So if Mira, could you come on?
Hello.
Hello. So nice to meet you.
Lovely to be here. Lovely to be here. Thank you so much for having me with you all. And I hope my memory will serve me properly. in your
We are willing
memory.
to be let down gloriously, if that to be the case. Thank you for both the film and for taking out the time. We know it's really early there, and it's cold, so it's nice to be in a warm, cozy conversation. Let's actually just get down to having the conversation. I could talk forever. So I was wondering, in 1985, you make this film, and I'm wondering what was the kind of political and cultural climate that made you do this? It's a few years after Salam Bombay. It is Bombay, but a very different one. And in the film, but we don't know if it was different in those times. So I'm just wondering, what were the compulsions of making the film? If you could kind of take us through that.
Sure, sure. So this was actually filmed in 1984 and finished in 1985. 5 years, 3, 4 years before Salam Bombay. Um, I came from the tradition that is known a little pretentiously but truthfully as cinema verite, which is the cinema of truth, and the cinema of not really tampering with what you see in front of you, not manipulating it in the way that many documentaries today are. They have music, they have this, they have that. But in those days, I was taught by Ricky Leacock and Penny Baker and Jean Rouche. In the these were my teachers. Actually, I was lucky. I had a scholarship in the States and sought out these people. And so the idea was to really enter a world that you wanted to enter, and that where people could let you in and be a part of that atmosphere for sometimes months before one brought a camera into it. I'm from Orissa. I'm from Delhi. I left to go on this scholarship simply to return. I mean, I had never had any intentions. I still have trouble calling myself an immigrant. I have an Indian passport that is an accordion, several passports of several visas for everywhere I go. So the idea after studying and getting my BA in visual studies was to return to India always. Um, and this question, this idea of what led to India Cabaret was the absolutely burning question in me, is what is the line that divides especially a woman from being considered outside propriety, outside society? And what is the line? And it's always, as we well know, it's to do with economics, and it's to do with the body, you know and I did not want to make something that was of like a, I wanted to make something with where I saw women and worked with women who were actively dealing with that Damocles sword, and I came those years, it was 1983, I think, and I had made one documentary so far from India in this style. But this question was leading me to several places. I went to very many meetings of feminist movement at the time, women's movement in Delhi, even in Kerala, wherever I could, to see and hear the dialogue that was around. And I must say that I did not feel a part of it. I did not feel, I felt it was moralistic. I felt it was, I'm sorry to say this, but I felt it was judgmental. I felt it was also very upper class. And it was not to do with the pulse of necessity that promotes such situations. So that led me on a fairly confidential almost search, because my family in Delhi had absolutely no interest in my pursuing this line of questioning. In fact, when people would say, Mira kahan hai aajkal, they would say, oh, to bas pata nahi kahan chali gayi hai. I was not, I was incognito, thankfully, actually. And this journey led me to a seedy nightclub called Meghraj in Ghatkopar outside Bombay. And those days, Ghatkopar was not the bustling suburb or city that it is today. It was really the boonies, off a highway. And it was this place, Meghraj, and the owner of it, but more than the owner, the women who danced, it was a sort of hapless strip club, really. Nothing much, just 10 women who would each do an item, and there would be a bunch of men looking at them, ordering drinks and getting smashed by every hour. And they weren't even dancers. It was about just taking your clothes off and having a twirl and coming back, but getting paid for it and so on. So I went into this place and really unusually found Rekha, especially who is the protagonist of India Cabaret, who's a remarkably saucy, Muphat kind of fantastic individual with great humor and great acerbic look at life, and nothing to do with being demure about it or to be shy about it. She was a real character and someone who gave me strength, I must say. And in slight contrast to her was Rosie from Hyderabad, also like Rekha, who was unusually, again, sort of determined to be sexy. She got off on being, for herself. She didn't, these were not prostitutes at all. These were dancers, and that was that. And, but she liked all that. She used to get into satins and pinks and whatever it was that made her happy, And so these two characters really allowed me in to their lives. And I then talked to the owner of Meghraj, who was quite, alcohol was my best friend in India Cabaret, because all the men were either slightly drunk or smashed. So they said and allowed things to happen that I think they would never have done if they were sober. And he allowed me in, and allowing me in meant that I practically lived at the Meghraj for about 3 to 4 months. And I had a chawl. I lived in a chawl in Bandra on my own. I took a bucket of whitewash, I remember, and just painted the walls of inside so I could have something. And And for the first 2 months, I was on my own, and then a small crew joined me. But the first 2 months, I asked Rekha and Rosie if I could live with them, and they said yes. And they lived in Antoffi, which I never knew till years later was actually Antop Hill, which they called Antoffi. And there was a great indoctrination, really, of being absolutely at all hours of the day and night considered a stripper myself. Like that's how I would be treated, that's how I would be looked at, that's how I would be joked with in every way. So that was, I was saying before we began this conversation, a deeply humbling and like a burning shower every day, because it's not enough to be observing such things. It's quite important to feel the sense of, I don't know how to put it. I guess it's a burning. It's a burning that every day you're confronted with the double standards, with the patriarchy, with the insults, and with the necessity as well that they have for people in that sense like us. So anyway, that began this odyssey, which in the rules of cinema verite, you never know where the story will lead. You are just there with your 16 camera, and at that time, remember, stock was very expensive, so you couldn't just shoot like you shoot in digital. Now you shoot very carefully, and I only brought the camera in about 2 months later into this process, when Rekha, Rosie, and all the girls really knew me, and I was like practically a fly on the wall, and I already knew like what I was interested in, but I would never know until we were actually shooting what would actually happen or come out of their mouths. So anyway, just a long introduction to how it happened. And it took about a year, several months with them in Antoffi. And then, Rosie is saving money for her sister's wedding. And then we go with her across to Hyderabad on a train and expect that she will be at her sister's wedding, sorry. And then, of course, things change. Life is infinitely more powerful than fiction can ever be. And that leads into something else, etc., etc. And then finally, after feeling like I really had a hefty chapter of Rekha and Rosie's life and dreams and desire for actually putting respectability aside, I convinced Mr. Pujara, who was a very regular at the club, who came twice or thrice a week, to let me literally go home with him, which is why you see my parents did not want me to exist for that moment. And actually he let me, and I went and I lived with him and Mrs. Pujara and his parents and their children in Bhindi Bazaar for about 3 to 4 weeks in their home, and learned, I think I made my first paratha in Bhindi Bazaar myself. And anyway, and there, in speaking to Mrs. Pujara at length over several evenings and nights, and often alone, I realized and made the question in my own mind, like, who is the more free? The woman who has respectability and propriety, but really dreams of some sort of freedom, or the woman who has freedom, but in a sense, no respectability, but the dream of, and actually in a way, the living of the freedom. In a sense, a Rosie who enjoyed, who exulted in what she wanted to do, despite the daggers of pain that were given to her by her family, who took her money and did not allow her in to the shadi because she would be considered inauspicious. That was nothing I expected, and to see that and to feel that, so, but to put it all together in this ménage à trois, in the one who has and the one who hasn't, it really makes me question, and makes me question, the world, as who draws that line.
So many things there. I am particularly kind of thinking about the pulse of necessity as one of the things that feminism really has to pay attention to, and your disappointment with the kinds of conversations that one found oneself in, especially around these women. And actually, honestly, the film has so many people being contradictory. It's really
Yes.
refreshing. It is whether the first conversation with the client where he desires both the show and the wife at home, who is the opposite of the show, or Rosie, who really tussles with her sense of autonomy, but also the heartbreak of being really rejected by her family, and not being able to be there for her sister's wedding, or even Rekha constantly deciding between which boyfriend to finally settle down with, and so on and so forth. So it's quite interesting what you mentioned, because really a lot of what is called hypocrisy is often this kind of high moralism about the contradictions of others, but it is actually, honestly, contradictions that make life survivable, right?
Mhm,
It's
mhm.
really, if there was no contradiction, all of these women would actually just not be able to survive and answer to the call of necessity. And so it's really, I think the greatest kind of, for me, the most interesting bit about the film is its departure from a political position
Mhm, mhm.
to one in which you front the conditions of survival, and that being contradiction itself. So I really kind of appreciate that, and of course, Rekha and Rosie really kind of steal the show. But I'm also wondering, in terms of even making film,
Mhm.
the camera is so present inside. It's unabashed. It's there.
Yeah.
It's in people's faces. They're touching, holding, having conversations with the camera right there. The men are persuading Rosie to go out with this client. Uh, Rosie is lying on the floor and touching the band with her feet. Rekha's also flirting, etc. I'm just wondering, how did this comfort actually, how what were your kind of what did you have to do for a camera to exist as if it doesn't in this space, as if there was no shame, something
Yeah.
that we can come back to, but shame in the consumption of this hotel. Like, there is no one's faces are hidden, no one's trying to shy away from the camera, not the dancers, not the clients, not the manager, not the guards, no one. And I'm really trying to understand, how does the camera allow this? What did you have to do?
Um, firstly, it was after I brought the camera in only 2 months, and 2 long months of just being there, hanging out, not asking some questions, but just being a part of the party in a way. And also acting myself, in the
Mm,
sense, because it was not a pretty picture, all the time
mm,
at all, and or
mm,
even sometimes okay, occasionally funny, but very painful the whole
mm,
as well. Anyway, so it was a few weeks, many weeks of just letting them know me and
mm,
trust me enough
mm,
to be completely themselves. And I'm, of course, my emphasis was on the dancers, Rekha and Rosie, and the others, but also the staff, also the band, also all the other, people around. So first it was just pretending ke kuch nahi ho raha. Exactly, just being there. Then I was going to joke and say, so what? How did you get the camera? I was going to joke and say, "Hi, Americans," because the Goras. I had my cameraman was uh, Mitch Epstein, actually a great photographer today and then too, and my first husband. We were not married. Yes, we were married then, and and um, and Alex Griswold, my sound engineer, who we went to school together. And these were two lanky Americans, Goras, and I remember Rekha, Rosie, ye do, I said, ye mard hoga, theek hai, andar green room mein aaye to theek hai. Arey, wo kya hijra hai, kuch nahi hai. They actually said this words, and they said, Arey, they are eunuchs, basically. We
right.
don't care because they don't understand us, the language, and
Yeah.
they are Goras. So it was wonderful to have Goras because they were like neutral people for
Mm,
them, you know,
yeah.
and so, and also non-judgmental, whatever, but actually not understanding, or so
Mm,
Rekha and Rosie, everyone believed. So, and they were very unassuming, but they came in only months, literally weeks after, 8 weeks, 10 weeks after. So by that time, the girls and everyone, the world, really had gotten super used to us, and these were American Goras who could not understand anything, so they thought. So it was a very, again, unobtrusive, unjudgmental, not people who they had to have currency with in any way, which really helped. And it's all about that, not all about that, but it's largely about how you conduct yourself, as a small, intimate unit, so that's how it happened. And they also saw that my interest was not in the titillation of it all at all. It was actually about daily life, and whether, as we were talking, whether I just loved how the extraordinary human interactions and great care that would happen with the staff and the dancers, and the amazing difference between them coming out on the floor and taking off one thing after another to complete nudity, and then coming back off and immediately gathering the sari and gathering the petticoat and changing under the petticoat in the green room. The notion of modesty and was very deep, and propriety was very deep, and these things affected me. And of course the humor that especially Rekha and Rosie brought, but Rekha, I mean, it was a way to deal with the there was no room for pity at all. This was their bed, and they were going to lie in it, and not just lie in it, but really enjoy it, and I don't mean the analogy of the bed. I just mean lying. So so that's how it happened with the camera, and we never, actually, we didn't film all the time. We were just there, so much of it, and it was alcohol in the night. In the night, the alcohol made everything like possible in the sense of the men, the customers not stopping us, and actually wanting to be in it, more. And I would just say, I would have to deal with that, as
No, I think really, in some sense, the film for me is not just about Rosie and Rekha, but about the life of this hotel.
Yeah.
We can talk about the many kinds of care, but even from the jazz musician to your conversation with the owner of Meghraj, it is really the field of labor, and it is the difference one notices in the way in which the others look at these women and engage with women versus the clients, and the kind of the sense you get is of everyone working together. And by that I mean not
making it work,
but everyone coming to work and doing their work, which involved a lot of facets of also care, about which we can talk in a second. The other thing, of course, is that in one of the conversations that you have with people, and it's quite evident that you're their friend, because sometimes even we hear you ask things and say things, and it's really, there is no way in which anything else but a friend can interrupt like that. It really, there is the evidence, the archive of your friendship present in the film. One of the things they say to you is about how they feel shame when they are pointed out by the same men from the club onto the street that there goes the whore, right? It's at that moment that they feel shame. So it's really about this kind of disaggregation of the many spaces of life, and in which, and I'm kind of thinking about what you just said about changing back in the green room and carrying on your modesty, because there is almost the trust in the client that the privacy of this transgression shall be maintained, and it is only when that is past that something like shame comes in. But I was wondering if you wanted to kind of also think about, like we said, our favorite scene is the omelette scene. If you want to kind of also talk about other forms of care and solidarity you saw inside the space.
Well, my favorite scene is one of them is the omelette scene, where this kitchen staff, a cook basically, who really, and he doesn't have any special relationship with one dancer or the other, but he just cares for them, and he knows that they have to drink sometimes a little bit in order to get out there and do their thing, and they have some slightly pathetic acts like putting a whiskey glass on your head and balancing it while while dancing to Black Magic woman, and it's affecting, but it's nothing deeply skillful. But in India especially, and also in this atmosphere of being observed and really kind of raped with your eyes, with their eyes, they have to loosen up, so they drink and a little bit, and this kitchen, this cook just always cared that they had to eat along with the drinking, otherwise they wouldn't sustain the night. And so he makes an omelette every evening, really, for Rekha, and every moment comes back, omelette khaya didi, omelette khaya, omelette le lena. And they joke with them, and they have this brother sisterly thing happening, and it's actually lovely because it keeps their lives together on both sides, the kitchen, the cook, as well as them. They create that own sense of interconnectedness and dependency with their lives, and it was the same thing at home in their tenement in Antoff Hill. In fact, it was one of the early inspirations of what became Salam Bombay 2-3 years later. Was in the mornings we would stagger back from the nightclub around 2 a.m., 3 a.m. And Antop Hill is genuinely, at that moment, was one of the filthiest areas. It was actually a garbage dump. Pigs careened around the exterior because they went into the garbage. So we had to walk home from a scooter with Rekha Rosie through pigs careening through mud. I mean, it's very, I actually wished I could have shot that. Anyway, we would go up, and of course, a lot of the guys just watching and wondering which one they could have, and that whole thing. And we'd get up there to their house, which was essentially 3 or 4 mattresses on the floor, and they would just pass out, sleep. And around 12 noon, this little chai pao, this kid, would come, and it's a lovely scene in the film as well. And it would be a fantastic reversal of roles where Rekha and Rosie and Sona, I remember, would just be splayed out on the floor, and they would say nacho. like like the Hindi movies of the time, where the villain would say to the gangster mall, dance. And it was the same tone. And then this poor chap would dance the only line he knew, which is "I am a disco dancer," and just repeat it and repeat it. And these girls would then slowly get up and have the hot tea. Again, it was that same care, ke garam pio. Abhi ne, don't let me just leave the tea here, abhi pio. And they would drink tea and slowly wake up, and this chai pao would go. And that chai pao would come every morning. And actually, and we managed to film it one day. And it was one of the earlier seeds of what became Salam Bombay. That has its own journey, but it was one of the earlier times. Yeah. And yeah.
No, it really is. That scene is quite remarkable because I think it also sets up a very different kind of living and care arrangement than the one in the house.
Yeah.
Of Mr. Pujara.
Yes.
And it's not simply that these two, what sustains a particular kind of femininity is not just in relation to itself and what it does with its body, but also what it builds around itself, right? What is different about Mr. Pujara's life, Mrs. Pujara's life, and Rekha and Rosie's is precisely what they imagine is a sustainable life together. And for Pujara, it is this kind of Mr. Pujara's life, husbandship, and these grandparents and the children. For Rekha and Rosie, it's this kind of affective universe of workers and other kinds of working class communities and so on and so forth, and living with friends, etc. So really, in some sense, for me, that's also, while what ties the two houses together is the life of labor, what separates them is precisely who that labor is done for.
Right.
In cases of Rekha and Rosie, it's not just for blood kin. Just wondering if you wanted to talk about maybe how did you come to decide on this kind of what seems like a juxtaposition of the household and the hotel, or Rekha and Rosie and Mrs. Pujara, and what were your kind of initial feelings around putting these two people in conversation?
Well, it all came from that dividing line, who decides, and what is this line that divides a woman from being considered respectable and not. And I remember actually one of the early inspirations to tell myself that I was not mad to pursue this was a discussion with my father, who was a civil servant, administrative service, and so on. And I told him this. I had this thought, and I wanted to explore this as a documentary. And he said, "Oh, I know all about them," he said. And I said, "Oh, really? How do you know all about strippers and dancers?" And he said, "Oh, a very respectable friend of mine introduced them to me once." And I said, "So how does that make your friend so respectable if you think the dancers are not?" And that was it. The discussion was closed. And that for me was a great spur, that immediately respectability was easily afforded to the man who, may or may not play with such women, but is beyond judgment in the same way Pujara is, but I knew that this was a path I could follow. It took me ages to find a space like the Meghraj which would allow me in. People are not interested, and women themselves. I mean, why should they be? Why should they be? And that's why I'm talking about time. Time and weeks and months to really allow them, because they're shana. They're smart and they're savvy people, and they have to be. Rekha, Rosie, all that gang, everyone. So they have to know who I am and why. And also I have to just be clear, because now things are so different with documentary. I have to be clear that there was no money in exchanged. People were not paid for this. I was a fly on the wall. I hardly had any money. Forget about money as a way of saying, "Tum ye karo to main ye dungi." No, it was just that I want to be with you, literally. And at that moment, Vikram, I did not know, in the beginning of it, I did not know that I would find a Pujara and I would find a Mrs. Pujara. I did not know that. I only knew that I wanted to make this world come alive in its prickliness and its pain and its also it's sort of fantastic humor and that ribald reality I loved, and because we are desi, I mean, they'll go into the ocean and they'll sing Ye Zindagi Ek Safar Hai Suhana, and they'll imagine that they are the other Rekha for the evening and all. Ye sab fantasies or releases and all. This is us, this is who we are. And all that. I wanted to make justice to that world without knowing that world, frankly. Again, these cinema verite films, you have no idea. It's not that you know everything and then you bring your camera. You are allowing them to take you in, but then you discover as it goes. And that's what the real bolt of electricity of this kind of cinema can be, is that you think you're going for one thing, but it becomes something else. Like the trip with Rosie across Hyderabad to give the money that she earns as a dancer as a dowry for her sister's wedding. And I literally thought I was going into a sister's, to a shadi in a village. But never did I see one, because she was not allowed. And that was so, that's what this kind of filmmaking and this kind of the drama of life is, and similarly about Pujara, I mean, imagine him, like imagine the scene, right? And I meet him often, of course, at the club, only at the club. And then I say, "Ek din, mujhe bhi aap, aap le jaiye ghar." and he said, "Chalo ji, chalo, no problem." And I literally arrived like that it's a nice big kind of traditional home, and I'm sleeping, and it was lovely in that sense. I was allowed in, and then slowly, slowly, they obviously thought. I mean, again, it's the power of Mr. Pujara. Bus brings this girl. I mean, class, I suppose, was on my side. It was clear that I was upper middle class or something, and so that there was some fascination also about that. But but plus then it was about mingling with her and just living Mrs. Pujara's life. But I never thought that could be possible, and it was certainly not a part of the original design. But it was wonderful because it was organic to the Meghraj as the place of the triangle. I didn't have to impose on it. It
Absolutely.
came from within. Yeah.
I'll ask you one last thing, and if the audience have questions, they should put that in the Q&A, and I can take some of them. Many years later, we would see the unfolding of another kind of conversation around dancing in bars in 2005, with the bar dancers kind of down, and really, in some sense, the conversation was very different from what it would have been in 1985 around obscenity and so on and so forth. But very centrally in 2005, it was about caste relations, about how caste determined the scene of living in Bombay. For me, I had to watch the movie a couple of times in order to not impose my own kind of universe of political thinking onto this film and bring that. So I'm just wondering, when you showed the film back then, what were the kind of responses or thoughts that you got from audiences around the film, and what did it enable in some sense for you in the public scene?
It was very interesting and again unimaginable in terms of I never imagined it. So what happened was it was 1985 and the film was picked as somehow the opening night of the India International Film Festival, which took place in Hyderabad that year. And it was unusual for a documentary to be asked to open. I don't know if it was the main section, but it was the opening night of one section. And those days it was 1985, so it was no single plexes, multiplexes. It was those huge 1,500 seat theaters, and I was there, and also Rekha and Rosie both are from the Hyderabad area. So we have to also remember that the patois, that the language and the humor and all of that in the film was Hyderabadi, in terms of slang and accent and all of that, just to say that. And so were Rekha and Rosie were there. And I brought them, and they were there. And I went into the theater and it was 1,500 all men, because a title like India Cabaret obviously elicited the idea that it was a sex fest and it was going to be a pornographic something delight. But the film began, and it as you see, it has a lot of ribald, say it like it is kind of humor. And just the speech alone, because we know, you and I and all of us, that the Hindi movie speech and dialogue is very beautiful, but very artificial and very, not how we really speak, right?
Yeah.
And this was an unusual film in how we really spoke, and of course it was about a nightclub and it was about these dancers, and it was risque and fascinating, I suppose, to some. But what I didn't expect was this incredible silence that met, like the rapt attention with which it was seen, and then the freak out humor, the laughter. People were banging their seats in laughter, in the comic, in the sort of the fun of it. I never expected any of that. And then both the discomfort and the fun was enormous. And it was 1,500 men, and it was quite hard to, in that sense, to see. But what was a real revelation was the language and how potent it was, really, in every way. What happened after the screening was that I was shunned, absolutely shunned, by a lot of women's groups and feminist groups at the festival. So much so that I used to walk down a corridor, and they would just see me and walk away like I was the coronavirus, and I felt it, and of course I was being accused of foreign gaze, bahar se aayi hai, what is your address, this all that old thing. And until in Hyderabad, there was a working women's union of secretaries, and they invited me to show the film. And those days, I went anywhere that whoever wanted, I would take the 16 reel under me. In many cases, I would have a projector as well, but in this case, no. And I would show the film. And when I showed it to these working women's secretary union, it was just a different thing, because they were like, this is how we live. This is, may not be dancing, but this is our life. These are the standards. These are the double standard. This is our struggle. And it was incredible solidarity. And that sparked off a series of screenings like this with working women's groups, and often not upper class, and this carried me through several screenings in Hyderabad, in down south in Kerala, and also in Bombay. In fact, I noticed that this is being sponsored by the Max Muller in part, and the Max Muller Bhavan in Bombay had a big screening, amongst many other screenings as well. And there, the tide began to turn, because so many unions and working women had seen it and had really taken this film as their, in a sense, and almost as their anthem. In a way, it took months, but there were several editorials written on it and all of this. And the tide began to turn from it being immediately, initially dismissed as a kind of whatever gaze, to really being truly about the double standards, about the struggle, about the that terrible gray area, you could say, or whatever, about the actual prickliness of living in such ways. And so that was very heartening. And it also, I have to say, on another level, I was went to Hyderabad that year with my best friend Suni Tarapurwala. We were both graduated from college. I had made this. She was working as a photographer, and our idea was to go to Hyderabad and then go to Orissa to start a kind of film about my growing up there. And but when we both heard the power of the language in that theater, and how it just, was really captured people. Then I switched the direction of our journey and decided and said to Suni, let's make a film in this language, in with the street kids of Bombay, which is something I had been talking to her about because of the Chai Pao in India Cabaret, because of several sites that I had lived around in Antoff Hill, where street kids roam, where they perform for nothing. And the thread that was common to both India Cabaret and Salam Bombay was this lack of pity. Don't cry for me. I will live. I will be a child in this case. I will dance in the other case. That was the common thread. And so that's what turned us over to coming back to Bombay and working on a film which would have that language of the street, of the mix, the mishmash of India, which is on the streets of Bombay.
No, a lot. Like, I remember one of the most kind of perceptive scenes for me is when you were speaking to one of the persons in the film, and this woman says, I'll get a job as a secretary. I'll get 200, 300 rupees, or I'll get to package things or whatever. But harassment I face inside the club is the harassment I will face there also. There, men will touch me, and so on and so forth. So really, in some sense, honestly, the film is really about labor in some sense.
Yeah,
and in fact, some of the questions that people have is with regards to all of this kind of solidarity of labor. But the opening question really is about the jazz musicians, and the music in the film is remarkable. And so people are curious about them, and what was your relation to them, and what was the world of these jazz musicians and where they came from and so on and so forth. If you could share a bit of that.
Well, it's that amazing story that I don't know, you all should see, Nacho Compasar, the great film on Goan bands a few years ago, which I loved. Well, the band was a motley crew that I think were there, partly Goan, partly not. They would look for day gig work in Indian movies, background orchestras, etc. But this was a gig, and they were there for a long time, and they were, tired but still very human, and very decent guys. They were not, again, there was nothing. It was a safe, weirdly, a very safe environment before the customers came in. The band and the kitchen staff and even the owner. It was not like at all an uncomfortable space. So the band was like that. Mostly going and hoping for gigs in the movies, not going to be really regarded very highly by the outside world, but working at the Meghraj was a bread and butter. And the songs, I mean, Black Magic Woman, or so many of the songs were the songs of the time, and also picked by the women because they had dances that went with them. Lavina's Black Magic was, so again, contrary to my other movies where I pick music and really work on it, I didn't pick the music here.
Right.
I loved it, but I worked with it, but it was their choices. It was whatever was happening. I've lost touch with the band, of course, but yeah, that was how it was. And it's this unsung ribbon of musicians. Today, till today, they are unsung. Of these great Goan bands, basically. I also paid homage to them in Suitable Boy, because that's what they were. They were the heyday of the 50s, and then they sort of became these tired gigs at or CD nightclubs. Yeah, sadly.
I mean, maybe someday there will be a film about them. One of the people, an anonymous attendee, is asking, and it's a long question. It's so I'm going to try and read it. When the wife of one of the clients comes in the frame and breaks away the hidden idea of dark space of the hotel, what prompted you to make that mirroring of these images, which also happens towards the end of the film when another brothel comes into the frame and a hierarchy is set to demarcate it away from the life and scenes of the hotel? What did you think of these three mirroring images between the hotel, the home, and the brothel, which are also deeply economical amongst many other things?
Wow, that's a perceptive question. I'm sorry to say that I'm trying to remember the situation. I may not do justice to this answer because I don't think there was some great funda that was operating in my head, but I have a fascination with triptych mirrors, with mirrors in general, and in cinema verite filmmaking, which is one of the reasons I actually moved to making fiction film more after, is one could actually construct the frame and have a meaning to the frame that you intend. But in these mirroring shots, it's almost like a little bit of a gift in cinema verite, to have such things like mirrors, which show you what is seen and then what is unseen. And in what is unseen, there are perhaps some messages, some wisdom, some reality that you otherwise would not see, So I guess it was that, but forgive me, it's been 20 years since I've seen the film, so I can't speak exactly, but I know that it's actually an image that I probably used in every other film, just because it is about literally about seeing things from different angles, at the same moment.
Right. It's really this kind of, it's really interesting because this is a time before sexuality came into these conversations as identity and rights.
Yeah.
A different time. And in fact, one of the questions that is also asking about this liminal sense of seeing something is when Mr. Pujara points out a trans sex worker to you on the street, and one is wondering what if you were, in some sense, Shayan is asking, did you have footage around these trans sex workers, or did they come up in your conversations and your research and so on and so forth?
It's like how India we are. I mean, they were part of the universe, again, marginal part of the universe, but I wasn't. It wasn't a great. It wasn't. It wasn't really judoed inside the Meghraj, inside the world that our characters lived with. And if it were, I would have gone there. But I just didn't go there only because I didn't want to do the easy thing of, the exotic thing, the ajeeb sa, how it is. I have to say, the trans sex worker, the person, the hijra community in general has always actually inspired me. But I look askance. I don't trust always when people make books or movies about. It's very. I've never seen yet a portrayal where I understand the deepest humanity of a person who is born that way or wishes to be that way, whichever. And so I don't want to just, in the case of India Cabaret, just raise a flag of, another oddity in a sense, quote unquote, so it wasn't about this world, and I didn't go there. And it is something I must say, I know such extraordinarily beautiful encounters and stories about this, and of course, like all of us have dealt with it, whether you're moving into your house, they all come, and all of that, and I have strange kinship. I feel a kinship, but I don't want to do it lightly. I don't want to do it superficially or lightly, and it needs a, if one were to do this, it needs a much deeper and fuller commitment to really understand. And often I wish that actually a film could be made by a person within the community, not not us who will observe and judge,
Yeah. Absolutely, and we will wait for that film. So, I think they're showing, the festival is showing Grace's film, and so I'm yet to see it, but if we have yet to see that. But I'll maybe leave this as the last question to wrap up today. Anushka Kundu is curious to know if Mira still keeps in touch with her friends from Meghraj.
I kept in touch with Rekha and Rosie for about, I would say, 15 years. And then I lost touch with them because they just are very nomadic, actually, and they just kept moving. And I lost touch with them, sadly. But Rekha, still, when I met her last, which was 20 years ago, she was still, making the same jokes. Ki isko pending mein rakha, usko lagaya, usko nahi lagaya. She was, but she hadn't, in another sense, settled down at all. It was the same life. But sadly, I've lost touch with them. I hope they are well, and I hope they're safe. And but I don't know where they are.
We also hope the same.
Yeah.
On that note, I can ask Anindya to come back and close the conversation for us. Thank you, Mira, for this.
That was the quickest 1 hour, was it?
Yes. Lovely and sweet conversation. Your memory did not betray you. It was thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Anindya.
Yeah, so thank you, Mira, and thank you, Vikram, for this fascinating conversation. And one of the things that I was, when there were these flashbacks, coming from Calcutta, and is about this iconic cabaret dancer, Miss Shefali, who had sort of reached that almost that cult-like status in the 50s and the 60s in the nightclubs of Calcutta, and has been there is no film on her, but there are several interviews of her and some work by Nimai Ghosh. So that was also something that was, and in fact, what I leave this conversation with is what Mira sort of pinned so wonderfully, which is that there is no room for pity, and but I mean how how pity and piety, I mean, and as these sort of sort of almost as binaries kind of govern the conversations and lives of the women, and how they sort of almost seep into the bones, as it were. So thank you so much. It is such a fascinating reminiscing for all of us, and especially the the craft in which Mira constantly goes back to, the process of the filmmaking. Um, Thank you very much to share this journey with all of us, and yes, Vikram, thank you again for accepting to be part of this conversation. And Mira, really, this was really one of our, I mean, a personal highs, and all of us were sort of exchanging texts like, "Oh, this is our fangirl, fanboy
Oh,
moment."
thank you so much. And I only have one request, which is that I meet you all in person when we can meet again.
Yes,
Oh,
inshallah.
that would.
It's,
Inshallah.
it's lovely to have, like, Zoom has made this democratic conversations possible from all over the world, but there's nothing to beat the human interaction, and I really miss that so much, and hope that we can meet in Delhi and Calcutta. Next January I'm
Oh,
back for the whole year, so come on.
Wow.
oh,
We invite you to come
wow.
to Kolkata.
Please,
Of
I'll come
course.
back home. Thank you
Lovely.
so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so
Thank
much,
you so
everyone.
much.
Thank you for
Thank
Good
you.
luck with
organizing.
the festival, and I wish I could see more that you're showing there. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, bye.
Bye.
Have a good night, everyone.
Bye.
Good morning for me.
Good. Have a lovely day ahead.